And joining us now is Ontario's Attorney General Chris Bentley, who 1 month ago today also became the province's Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. He's the MPP for London West, and we welcome you back to TVO.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure to have you here. Yeah. Okay, somebody in the Premier's office calls you and says, not only do we want you to be the Attorney General, but we want to give you this other job as well. What was your reaction?
Well, the Premier called and I'm delighted. I'm absolutely delighted. Big challenge, remarkable opportunity, and I hit the ground running.
What's to be delighted about? This is a hard job.
Of course it's a hard job, but you know, the Premier has been very clear on the direction. We need to do better. We need to strengthen the relationships and find opportunities that are there to be found, economic opportunities, for example, and get on with it. And that's what I'm doing.
Why do you think he picked you?
You know, I leave those decisions, those are his decisions, and I don't question them. I didn't question them when I was called. I'm just delighted. You know, in the past month, I've had the opportunity to go from Leamington in the south, meeting Grand Chief Randy Phillips from the Association of Iroquois and Allied Indians, to North Spirit Lake, a couple of hours north by plane of Thunder Bay, and many points in between, trying to meet as many as possible, as many Grand Chiefs, I've met them all, the regional chief, and as many chiefs in their communities as possible to get on with the job.
Before you had this job, had you had much experience in Aboriginal affairs?
Well, I think it's fair to say that in my in my previous role as a lawyer before being elected, I did. It was the sad side, a very sad side of Aboriginal affairs. In my role as Attorney General, of course, I have a role relating to Aboriginal affairs. When I was training colleges and universities minister, we did some work on the James Bay Employment and Training Project, making sure that people in the communities along the James Bay coast were able to obtain training, upgrading, so they could actually benefit from the jobs that are the De Beers diamond mine. So.
Okay, here's the question that you know is coming. And I'm going to quote Chief Stan Beardy from the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, who said the following after you were given this additional responsibility. It seems, he said, like we're going backwards. I'm definitely frustrated and very disappointed that the Premier does not see Aboriginal issues as worthy of having a stand-alone minister. You know, of course, that one of the key recommendations to come out of the Ipperwash inquiry was to have a stand-alone minister and ministry. And the critics say that because you're already Attorney General and you're taking on this extra responsibility, you're neither fish nor fowl, you can't do both jobs well, AG's a big job, and the government has let many Aboriginal communities down by doing this. What's the response to that?
I think it was a fair concern on the part of Grand Chief Stan Beardy. I've met him, I think, at least 3 times since then. You know, as I say, I'm working as hard as I can to make sure that we deal with all of the issues that need to be dealt with and push them forward. I may be the head of a standalone ministry, but I'm not standing alone in this government when it comes to Aboriginal affairs. And my colleague Brad Duguid, who was here for a couple of years before me, is now at Energy. We're already working together on the opportunities that exist under the Green Energy Act for Aboriginal persons throughout the province of Ontario on those initiatives. And to be clear, you know, the direction comes from the Premier.
Okay, let me follow up, because it was his decision. I mean, you're sitting in that chair tonight, but it was his call not to have a standalone, and I appreciate what you're saying about you're not standing alone. But optics are important in politics, perceptions are important, and the perception is this community had a standalone minister before the 18th of January. They don't now. How does that not look like somehow they've been reduced a peg in the priority list of the government?
Well, not at all. You know, we are, I mean, without wanting to parse words, the recommendation in the Ipperwash inquiry was for a standalone ministry, which we have, and a dedicated minister. Now, I'm a pretty dedicated minister.
Okay, what's the distinction there? When you say standalone ministry, but not a standalone minister, what's the difference?
Well, we have a separate ministry, separate deputy minister, separate ministry staff. They have not been merged in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the political staff, the one that directly assists me, is separate. So everything is separate about it. It's true that there aren't 2 people, there are 1, but I think the important point is, over the past couple of years, every single minister in this government has been mobilized on Aboriginal issues, and the Premier's direction is not only keep going, but accelerate the progress. That's what I'm doing.
Okay, let me follow up with this thing. I think you know Graham Murray, who writes a pretty good political newsletter called Inside Queen's Park. He says, he reported in his last newsletter, that the Aboriginal community also lost its parliamentary assistant, last Friday. That Jeff Leal from Peterborough, who had the job, has now been given other responsibilities. So they have a situation now where there is no standalone minister, there is no parliamentary assistant. Again, how does that demonstrate this government's commitment to Aboriginal issues?
So look, I'll leave those decisions to the Premier. Last week I was in Thunder Bay. On Wednesday of last week I attended a mining symposium put on by the Matawa Tribal Council. It was a fascinating symposium. They're the ones around the Ring of Fire, which is probably the richest unexploited mineral deposit in the world. First Nations, together with about 300 representatives of mining communities. And the message from all was, we want to move forward, we want to make progress together. And that's the message.
No, I
how
get
do
that.
we forge the relationships, cement the relationships? How can I facilitate the cementing of those relationships between First Nations and the business community so that all benefit, not just for a day, but for a lifetime and for generations?
I totally
after
get that. I totally get that. But I wonder if at some point in your conversations with the Premier about this, when he tapped you for these responsibilities, did you ever say to him, didn't we promise these guys a standalone minister, and how's it going to look if I've got two portfolios? Did you have that kind of conversation with him?
You know, when I've spoken to Grand Chiefs and the regional chief and the other chiefs, and a number of them have raised this very issue, I said, don't take anything on faith. Just watch what I and we as a government do. So in the past month, as I say, I've been in Leamington with Grand Chief Randy Phillips.
We believe you. You're a dedicated minister.
This was
the Premier's call.
But this is getting on with the job. And at the end of the day, whether there's one person here or 5 people in this ministry, we should be measured by not the number of people in the chair, but by the progress we're making.
Okay. Adam Radwanski wrote the following in the Globe and Mail. Since last month's cabinet shuffle, there has been speculation that newly elected MPP Glenn Murray or Bob Shirelli, another former mayor running in another by-election in Ottawa, is ready to take it. The suggestion is you're kind of here as a placeholder, and once one of these new guys gets elected, you'll probably lose these responsibilities and they'll bring a new guy in to take it over. Can you tell us if that's the case?
So you know what, today I met with not only regional chief, but it's getting on with the job. I don't make those decisions. Regional chief Angus Toulouse about how we improve economic opportunities for First Nations, Aboriginal
Talk
peoples
about the
in
HST
province.
with him?
Absolutely.
Okay. He's going to be here next week talking about that.
I also met with Chief Day of Serpent River, who's put together, he and his colleagues have put together a 22 First Nation consortium to talk about transmission opportunities across First Nations and how First Nations benefit from that. You know, that's the type of project that I told Chief Day I was very interested in finding out more about, working with my colleagues like Brad Duguid, and Mike Gravel in Northern Development of Mines and Forestry, and then sitting down with Chief Day and saying, how do we make sure that First Nations benefit from the great opportunities that exist in power generation and transmission?
Okay, let me talk, enough politics, enough politics. I'm moving on.
Never enough politics.
Well, we're moving on. I want to talk to you about, and we're going to talk with our other guests later in the program about this as well. The appalling teen suicide rates in Northern Ontario in the James Bay area. 13 First Nations youth have taken their lives. 80 have attempted to, all by hanging. This is all just appalling stuff. I mean, I gather in the short run you've brought some sort of crisis managers to bear here, and had some mental health officers have moved into the area to try to help. What is the longer range solution to this kind of appalling problem?
Well, there has to be a solution. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know exactly what it is, but I do know that doing what we've done in the past is not achieving any result that anybody wants. My colleague Laurel Broughton, the new Minister of Children and Youth Services, actually about a week and a half ago was up in the north, visited, I believe, 4 different fly-in communities to speak firsthand about with people about some of the challenges. She and I are going to be working together. I know that she's done some work in determining how to strengthen the approach to youth issues, the hope we want our youth to have in every community within the bounds of the province.
Sounds like the circumstances of their lives are constant. You know, they're always going to be isolated. There's always going to be a lack of opportunity compared to people who live in the South. None of that's going to change. So why would the outcome of their lives change?
Well, look, in the short term, we need to do something to deal with the crisis. But in the long term, let me disagree with you, Steve. The economic opportunities of First Nations people in the province of Ontario, Aboriginal persons, are going to change. The opportunities presented, the Ring of Fire, hydroelectric and other power generation, resource sharing, that is going to change. Our role, part of my role, is to make that happen sooner, assist in making that happen sooner, at the same time as we deal with the very real social circumstances that lead young people to take their lives. And there isn't going to be, I suspect, I don't know enough about this to be blunt, yet, I suspect there's not one answer. Communities are different. First Nations communities will be different. But it starts by working with people in the First Nations community, by looking for ways to keep families together and strong and strengthen them, and working out from there. And I know my colleague Laurel Broughton is working very hard on this and feels that this is an absolute priority of our government.
I got to ask you about Caledonia, and to that end, this was in the Toronto Star a week ago. A judge has ruled that businesses and residents of Caledonia can move forward with a class action lawsuit against the Ontario government and provincial police for not ending a lengthy blockade by Aboriginal protesters. It began 4 years ago this month, when members of the Six Nations Confederacy began occupying a 40-hectare subdivision known as Douglas Creek Estates, claiming Aboriginal title over the land. Several local residents alleged they were continuously subjected to loud noises and drumming, in some cases received death threats, and were accosted by demonstrators wearing camouflage gear and carrying bats. We know this whole thing. I mean, it's complicated, and it's... What's the latest on the ministry's attempt to resolve what's going on there?
Well, we're, as a government, we've been doing a lot. But we're not there yet. And one of the challenges that we've had, unfortunately, is we need the federal government at the table as a full, determined participant. At the end of the day, when you have a 200-year-old land claim dispute, it's the federal government that needs to be there fully at the table and participating as strongly and forcefully as they can. There is a lot going on. Am I looking for opportunities to move it forward faster? Absolutely. Am I sensing that there are discussions that the Six Nations surrounding communities are wishing to have with each other? Absolutely.
But this is when your other portfolio becomes interesting, because you're, as the Attorney General, your interests may not be the same as you, Chris Bentley, Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. Only insofar as the Aboriginal Affairs Minister, presumably you have to take their interests, that community's interests, to heart. As the kind of chief law enforcement guy or the chief lawmaker in this province, as Attorney General, how do you convince the townspeople in Caledonia that there aren't two different standards of justice being applied here?
Well, look, my role as Attorney General is my role, and when I put on the administration of justice hat, I deal with many different situations at many different ministries, many different people around the province of Ontario. That is a role. I'm an ardent advocate for Aboriginal affairs. I'm convinced that we can find a solution.
Hasn't happened in 4 years yet.
I'm convinced we can find a solution. The fact that something hasn't happened in 4 years is no reason to give up. It's a reason to redouble efforts. We do need the federal government here as an even stronger participant in these resolutions. I'm also looking for opportunities to encourage the conversations between Six Nations surrounding communities. I know Six Nations in Brantford have had some very good conversations around, for example, green energy hub. One of the first things I did at the end of my first week was, with Brad Dogood, attend Six Nations and witness the signing between Samsung and Chief Montour of a green energy accord. That shows that things are happening, good things are happening. And although it's been 4 years, which is a long time, after the first year, it's been much quieter.
Oh, it's quieter, and look, no one's died, which is a big improvement over Ipperwash. But it's not resolved yet, and people in the town are upset, and they want to sue you.
It's not an acceptable state of affairs. We're going to work as hard as we can, continue and redouble our efforts. We do need the feds at the table. even more forcefully than they have been, because ultimately the resolution of a land claim can only be effected with the full and active participation of the federal government, and I'm looking forward to working with them, Minister Strahl, as we work with Six Nations and find the solution to this.
Chris Bentley, Attorney General of Ontario and Minister of Aboriginal Affairs of Ontario, good of you to visit us at TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.